Okay, good morning, afternoon. How's everyone doing? It's Dr. Kaz here. I know it's been a little while since I've been sending out these review videos to you. But here's the second part of chapter 6. We're going to be wrapping up this chapter, and then keep your eyes open because I'm going to be sending out chapter 7 as soon as I possibly can. And then we'll work on chapter 9 for our Blackboard Collaborate, which will be on October the 11th, Sunday night at 7 p.m. All right, so let's jump right in here and talk about the hair. Last session we talked about the nails, okay? And in this session we're going to begin with the hair, talk about the 3 zones of the hair. All right, keep in mind some of this you should already remember from lab class for the when we did chapter 6 in lab. Okay, so I want you to think of the hair almost like, well, if any of you are familiar with flowers, tulips specifically, very similar. All right, there's 3 parts to a flower, okay, 3 parts to a hair. All right, when we're talking about the most deep or bottom portion of the hair, that is the hair bulb. So when I look down into the skin here, you'll have kind of a swelling at the bottom there. And that's what we're referring to this area right here. All right, the hair bulb. All right, this is where we are going to see, all right, the hair starting to emerge, all right, and grow towards the superficial region here. All right, so our hair bulb is surrounded by hair papilla, all right, and that hair papilla is a connective tissue which is going to offer support, a little bit of protection, but mainly offer support. But the big thing that you need to understand, and this has been asked on some of the lab tests for chapter 6, and some of the students get this wrong, is that this is the only area, all right, of the hair in which we have living epithelial cells, okay? So we'll see it down here in this region, okay? We'll actually have the hair matrix, all right, and then below the hair matrix is our blood vessels, that hair papilla there, okay, the plexus. And so you'll have blood vessels coming in and leaving. And then the hair matrix, which is going to be the actively growing part of the epithelium, which is going to push the hair up towards the superficial region there, okay? So the big swelling at the bottom of our hair is going to be the hair bulb, where it starts to thin down, but we're still underneath the skin, the surface of the skin. That is the root of the hair, okay? So that is going to be below the surface of the skin. And then above the surface of the skin, all right, that's the shaft. So here's the skin, all right, and then the hair emerges, okay, and that's going to be the shaft. So those are the 3 regions to hair, okay, the 3 zones. So keep in mind, all right, one of the structures that we had talked about before, all right, was the hair matrix. And this is that area where we actually see epithelial cells dividing constantly there. And similar to what we saw in the epidermis, okay, those cells, as they're dividing, all right, they'll get pushed superficially. And that's what we see here. So those new cells are going to be pushed toward the surface of the skin, okay? All right. I want to see if I have a picture for it. I don't. One of the things that you want to understand too is when we talk about a medulla or a cortex in this course, all right, a medulla and a cortex are going to be, for example, when we mentioned the adrenal gland, okay, the center of the adrenal gland, okay, where your epinephrine, norepinephrine is made, that's called the medulla. And so the outer portion is called the cortex, okay? That's where cortisol is made, aldosterone. You'll learn all about that in chapter 17. Similar situation here when we're talking about the medulla and the cortex of the hair, okay? So the medulla, all right, is going to be closer to the center of the hair. All right, this is where we're going to see where that matrix there has been growing, all right, and those cells that were getting pushed up into that area, all right, those epithelial cells, that they'll be getting pushed up into the medulla. All right, so it's going to be a more flexible but softer portion of the hair. The outer portion, okay, that's the cortex, All right, so that's going to be more on the outer edges. That's going to be the harder portion. That's going to be the portion of the hair that gives it its kind of stiff configuration. Okay, and then outside of that layer, outside the cortex, we have the cuticle. All right, and it's one cell layer thick, and we find that outside the cortex. So if I kind of come into this, zoom in a little bit, show you what I'm talking about. Okay, let me shrink that down. All right, so what we're seeing here is, here's the hair bulb, all right, for our 3 zones. Okay, that little kind of swelling. All right, then you got the hair root, the remaining portion of the hair that's underneath the skin. And then finally the hair shaft, that'll be the portion that we see above the skin. All right, now when we get down here, okay, into the hair root, all right, you can see this darkish kind of brownish color structure. That is the hair medulla. And then this tan structure on the outside of it, that's the cortex. All right, and then on the outer portion, it's kind of like a dark brownish line here. That's the cuticle there. Okay, and down here in the matrix, this is where the epithelial cells are constantly dividing, and they keep pushing cells upwards. Hence the reason why hair grows out. Okay. All right. 2 other components here that you need to know for hair: the hair follicle. And I've often said that I compare the hair follicle to, like, well, you folks haven't seen me on campus, but usually I wear a long sleeve shirt. And the comparison that I use is a hair follicle is like the sleeve to my arm. So my arm would be the hair, and then the sleeve around my arm would be the hair follicle. All right. And so the hair follicle is this connective tissue, all right, that really helps to offer some protection, but kind of give hair its stability, its support structure. Okay. And this hair follicle, all right, actually, you want to know this, it actually comes from the dermis, right? It doesn't come from the epithelium, but it comes from it doesn't come from the epidermis, it comes from the dermis, all right? But when we're dealing with the tissue inside of it, all right, the actively growing tissue, all right, believe it or not, that comes from the epidermis, all right? Nails and hair are actually epidermal derivatives. Okay, they've come originally from the same tissue as the epidermis, but through development and whatnot, they've kind of invaginated themselves down into the dermis. All right, and then the last structure for the hair is the erector pili muscle. All right, the erector pili muscle, we talked about this before in lab, is a smooth muscle, so it's under involuntary control. All right, and this is the muscle, when it's stimulated, it contracts and it pulls on the actual hair follicle, all right, and it causes, all right, a contraction that elevates the hair. And you've heard of the term probably goosebumps, but I've also heard it referred to as goose flesh, which I don't know where that has actually originated from, all right. But that is the muscle that'll actually give you the goosebumps, because when it contracts, it pulls on the hair follicle, and it creates that small bump that you can see on the surface of your skin there. All right, a couple functions for hair. All right, protection, facial expression, heat retention, sensory reception, visual identification, and chemical signal dispersal. All right, protection is easy, okay? If you're as pale as I am, and if I were bald, and if I were to stand out in the South Carolina sun in the middle of July and August, the top of my cabeza, the top of my head, would be as bright red as a stop sign, okay? So hair helps to protect from ultraviolet radiation, okay? You can also see when we talk about facial expression, people raise their eyebrows when they're inquisitive maybe about something, so it helps with facial expression. The big thing is heat retention for hair. Just ask anybody that has thick hair, all right? In the wintertime, they're very grateful for having that hair on the top of their head, especially if they live in colder environments. Okay, take it from me, when I was living up in New York, I used to let my hair not grow very long, but it would usually grow longer in the winter. And I would still wear a hat, but it would help to keep my head warm. All right, sensory reception. All right, there's been times when I'm sure that you've been standing outside and you feel the wind blowing, and it's just a slight gust of wind and whatnot, but it can move the hair on your arms, the hair on your head, and then that can actually give you information like, hey, the wind is blowing. All right, you're actually kind of, I won't say in tune with your immediate surroundings, but it offers a little bit of help there. Visual identification. One of the ways that we're able to tell somebody is older is if they have gray or white hair, mostly gray here, okay? Or the loss of hair, okay? Usually in older folks. Chemical signal dispersal, if you've ever heard of pheromones, that is like your scent. And what will happen is usually around puberty is when we start to have our pheromone production occurring. And when you certain sweat glands, you'll secrete your sweat glands or their secretion onto some of your hair, maybe pubic hair in the axial region, in the groin region there, and that will actually cause that person to have a certain scent. I'm not saying that that scent is offensive or whatnot, but it creates that pheromone, all right, scent that then, you know, if it's strong enough, people can smell it and they can have a certain reaction to it. I'm not saying good or bad, but that is that. All right, let's talk about the glands of the skin here, mainly the exocrine glands. Remember, exocrine glands are glands that have ducts. All right, so we're going to talk about the two types of sweat glands and our sebaceous glands. All right, when we were labeling the skin, we talked about the merocrine and the apocrine glands. All right, so now we're going to go into a little bit more detail with that. And when we're talking about our merocrine glands, these are the ones that are pretty much substantially located throughout your body. Okay, on your arms, on your legs, palms of your hands, soles of your feet, they're everywhere. Okay, and what they do is they're going to synthesize and make their skin, and they secrete it right onto the skin surface here. And how they do that is through exocytosis. So you remember exocytosis, that process of exocytosis is that the cell packages up whatever the secretion is going to be, and it's going to fuse that secretory vesicle with the apical surface of the plasma membrane, and it's going to release its contents out into, all right, the gland area there, into the duct, and get secreted out of the duct onto the surface of the skin. So for these types of glands, all right, 99% of what it's secreting is water. Okay, the other 1% are going to be electrolytes, all right, waste products from the cells. Perfect example, urea. In case you don't know this, your sweat, all right, when you've been working out, or if it's just hot and you start to sweat, your sweat is diluted urine. Okay, so you do secrete not urine, but urea, which is a component of urine, all right, along with the electrolytes. If you've ever tasted your sweat, it's a little bit salty. That's because excreting out sodium and chloride together, making salt, all right? But these types of glands, their major role is in thermal regulation. This goes back to chapter 1, okay, when we talked about that negative feedback system that occurs. So when your body gets too hot, you start to sweat. That sweat process creates evaporation, all right, mainly from the water that's coming out of the sweat, and it cools your body down, okay? And that helps to decrease your body temperature in hot conditions. So that's the merocrine glands, okay? The other type of gland is the apocrine gland, okay? Now these glands, I always remembered apocrine begins with an A, and I always remembered axilla begins with an A, the armpit. And so does armpit. Armpit also begins with an A. So these glands are going to be found around the areas that start to become active during puberty. You start to grow hair in your armpits. You start to grow hair in your pubic region there. All right. So that's how I kind of remembered where these glands are located. Okay. So these glands, right, are going to be found specifically around hair follicles. So if there's no hair follicles in an area, okay, then you will not find these glands. So if you look at the palms of your hands, you're not going to see hair. So you won't find these glands on the palms of your hands or the soles of your feet, okay? So where there's hair follicles, mainly in areas that become active during puberty, is where you'll find these glands. So these glands are also going to produce their secretions through exocytosis. Except now in this situation, their secretions are a little bit more viscous. And what that means is it's going to be a little bit thicker than the American glands. American glands are mainly water. All right, we'll have some water here, but in this case, we're going to have more proteins and lipids. This type of gland was the gland that I described before as a lava lamp, okay, where it secretes its secretions through exocytosis, but part of that, all right, you lose part of the cell plasma membrane. And if you recall, the plasma membrane is made up of protein lipids, okay? So that's going to contribute to the viscous cloudy secretions, all right, that this cell produces, okay? And so as a result of that, or as a consequence of that, they will start to produce an odor. And the reason why is you have bacteria all over your body, okay? But and bacteria are just like anything else. They need nutrients to survive. They like sugars, they like all sorts of different things. But when these sweat glands are secreting proteins and lipids, the bacteria are like, well, I can get on top of that, so they'll start to metabolize those proteins and lipids. And just like anything else that's organic, all right, what goes in must come out. So they'll metabolize those nutrients, and then eventually they have to create the waste. And when they excrete their wastes onto people, all right, in those areas of the armpits, the groin area, the anal area, all right, nipple area, okay, it creates an odor, okay? And that odor usually comes from the byproduct of bacteria. So keep in mind again that these secretions don't start until puberty, okay? The last type of gland is the sebaceous gland, okay? Now these types of glands are what we refer to as holocrine glands. The holocrine gland is a gland in which the cells disintegrate or self-destruct. So the actual whole cell becomes part of the secretion. So this type of gland is going to produce a very oily type of secretion. In this case, we refer to it as sebum. And it actually will excrete its secretions right onto the skin and the hair because they are actually associated, as you remember from lab, primarily with the hair follicles. Okay? So they'll help to lubricate the hair, and also they act as a bactericidal agent. And what that means is that this sebum, all right, will help to kill off bacteria. Okay? So these glands, again, don't become active until puberty. And especially, all right, they don't become active until you start to secrete your androgens there, sex hormones, okay? So keep in mind, all right, when you start to produce certain hormones, all right, like for males, testosterone, all right, which occurs heavily during puberty, all right, then these glands become activated, and then they start to secrete their sebum onto the hair follicles there. And yeah, I mean, most people, especially in teenagers, just look at some boys out there that have greasy hair. They're definitely secreting that sebum, all right? So I'm always having to tell my 13-year-old son, take a shower, your hair's greasy. All right, so here you can see some of the pictures here for the exocrine glands of the skin. All right, here's your sebaceous gland, primarily around a hair follicle, okay? And then you've got your merocrine sweat glands here, and then your apocrine sweat glands over here, okay? All right, winding here to the last part of the skin, and what we're going to discuss is how we fix skin and how does skin regenerate, okay? So this type of tissue can be repaired in one of two ways, all right? Either through regeneration or fibrosis. Optimally, we want regeneration. That is the type of replacement, all right, that we primarily want, okay? And the reason why is, okay, when the skin undergoes regeneration, it's going to maintain or restore the organ function. Basically, what that means is, all right, anything that was damaged gets repaired and it goes back to business as usual. All right, sweat glands are able to secrete their sweat. All right, erector pili muscle are able to do their thing. Okay, but when you have fibrosis, then we're dealing with scar tissue. Okay, scar tissue is primarily made up of collagen, which is produced by fibroblasts. Well, depending on how much scar tissue is formed, all right, or how much collagen is laid down, all right, when we're dealing with fibrosis, then the organ function is not restored. And that's not ideal. Okay? So you need to know the difference between regeneration and fibrosis. Regeneration, all right, we replace everything that was damaged or everything that was dead with whatever it was, all right, the same type of cell. And then we've restored the organ function and things go back to normal. But with fibrosis, we're not so lucky, okay? Whatever was damaged, all right, or whatever died, all right, will get filled in or replaced with scar tissue, all right, that collagen. And then unfortunately, all right, our organ function is not restored. So let's discuss what happens when you damage skin. Now here, you're going to get into this in a little bit more detail in 211, okay? So we're just going to kind of gloss over the general points, but this is kind of like a good introduction, a good foundation, okay, for you folks to learn. So when you get into in 211, all right, you get into a little bit more detail, learn about what cells, what chemicals are being produced, okay? So this is kind of just like a general discussion of what's going to happen. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go stage by stage. I'm going to talk about the stage, show you a picture, come back, show you the second stage, yada, yada, okay? So the first stage, real simple, all right? Damage is done to the skin, and we cut some blood vessels. And what happens? The blood vessels start to bleed into the wound. And that's what we're seeing here, okay? Something happened, a puncture, a cut, all right, pretty deep. We're down into the dermis here. We've damaged some blood vessels, and blood vessels do what they do when they're damaged. They bleed, okay? And so the blood fills up this area here, all right, and it's going to start to clot, okay? So stage one, pretty easy, okay? Stage two, all right, we've got our clotting going on, but now we have to make sure, because we've compromised the internal environment to the external environment. So we need to mount an immune response, and that's what we do, okay? So as the blood is clotting, the leukocytes come in and they start to clean the wound, all right? The blood clot is important because it creates a barrier to the external environment. Remember, you've got viruses and you got bacteria, fungus, all sorts of stuff gets onto your skin, all right? And they just hang out there, okay? And so they're what we refer to as opportunistic organisms. They're just waiting for their chance. It's like that guy that's waiting outside the door to sneak into the movie theater, but all he has to do is wait for somebody to leave the exit door, then he can slip in. Well, that's what our opportunistic infections are doing. They're just waiting for this opportunity. So we get our leukocytes on hand, our white blood cells, right? So they're going to come on in here, okay, as we got our blood clot going on. So our white blood cells come in and they start to kill any pathogens that are in the area, all right? Part of those white blood cells are macrophages. Macrophages will go ahead and destroy any pathogens, but they'll also help to clean up damaged tissue. Okay, so the Pac-Man cell, they're running around, all right, and just cleaning up the damaged tissue. Fibroblasts now infiltrate this area here because they're going to start laying down collagen, because they're going to go to start to rebuild that damaged connective tissue here in the dermis. All right, and then the other cell that's probably tough to see here is the neutrophils. That's another white blood cell. Again, they're going to work on finding and killing any pathogens. All right, so that's step two. Step three, all right. Now we have to repair that damaged blood vessel, okay? So in most cases, we will start to repair that damaged blood vessel, regrow it, or if we can't repair it, then you undergo what's called neovascularization, and we just start to grow new blood vessels. As that is occurring, we start to get our granulation tissue. All right, our scar tissue is going to start to form because, don't forget, our fibroblasts are in there starting to repair that damaged tissue and laying down collagen. Okay, remember, collagen, if it's laid down in significant amounts, is going to eventually turn into scar tissue or that fibrotic granulation tissue. So that's what we're seeing here in step 3. Okay, here our fibroblasts are going into overdrive and they're starting to lay down that collagen, repairing that dermis. And now we're starting to go to work here and resorb that blood clot that was going on. All right, we've got some new blood vessels occurring here because that's what we need. Because remember, our blood vessels are our transport system. That's how we're going to be able to get the nutrients in there, the materials that we need to repair this damaged tissue. Okay, so meanwhile, again, fibroblasts are laying down more collagen. Okay, we are starting to get our macrophages now. They're still getting rid of that damaged tissue here. We're growing blood vessels here to get to that area there that's in need of nutrition and supplies. All right, so this is what we're seeing. This is going on, all right, as we're pretty much repairing our wound from the inside out. Okay, then the last stage, okay, and this is where we see the epithelium. The epithelium is usually the last to get repaired. So that epithelial tissue is starting to regenerate as we rebuild that stratum basal level there, or layer there, okay? And we're starting to regenerate that those keratinocytes and those other cells there, but we'll still have our fibroblasts in that area, and they're going to continue to lay down that connective tissue, and that fibrosis is still going to be occurring. As you can see here, all right, in this last stage here, okay, we've repaired the epithelium, okay, so we'll start to regenerate those epithelial cells, but we still have our fibroblasts here laying down that scar tissue, okay. So unfortunately, all right, any tissue that was here previously, as you can see, there was a damaged blood vessel that never got repaired, no problem. We grew some new blood vessels, all right, but at the same time, any tissue that was here previously is now scar tissue, okay? So again, this is just a basic overview, all right, of the stages of healing, all right? This is something, again, that you'll go into a little bit more detail, all right, when you get into 211. All right, the last topic here is the aging of our integument. What happens? We're going to end every chapter with what happens to that system as you get older. So keep in mind, the general rule with anything with aging is that everything slows down, okay? All the processes, metabolic activities, regeneration of cells, everything slows down. So when we say that we see that there's a reduced number and activity of stem cells, all right, that goes along with our storyline as we start to slow down. All right, the stem cells that we find in our skin, all right, is going to slow down in its regeneration and its division. So when that happens, skin repair slows down. Okay, so it takes people longer in their later years to repair, all right, any damage that was done from any sort of trauma. All right, we see less fibroblasts. So we're going to have fewer collagen fibers, all right? We'll also see that the elastic fibers that are present in our dermis, all right, we'll have fewer of those, all right? But at the same time, just like with those gym shorts that you've had for 15 years, all right, the elastic in the gym shorts eventually stops becoming stretchy. Same thing happens with the elastic fibers in your skin. And because they become less stretchy, we start to form wrinkles. All right, and we do have immune cells, all right, that we find in the epidermis. All right, remember those dendritic cells, the Langerhans cells? We see fewer of those, so therefore any type of immune response will be decreased because we have less dendritic cells there. All right, hair becomes thinner, all right, because the hair follicles aren't producing, all right, enough of the hair. So the hair becomes thinner, or they just stop working altogether and they don't grow anymore. All right, and then the last part here is something that is very, very important. Well, two things. One, ultraviolet radiation. Okay, this is something that has become much more more public awareness since I was a kid compared to now. I'm very, very careful when I take my kids outside. If we're going to be at the pool or whatnot, or at the beach, to make sure to put sunblock on. Obviously, some folks have better melanin production than others. I am not that fortunate. My kids are a little bit better. But point being is, we know that ultraviolet radiation, specifically, well, both ultraviolet radiation A and ultraviolet radiation B are both not good. B is the worst one. But it can damage your DNA. And that's the whole purpose behind the melanin. It coats the nucleus, and so it protects the DNA inside that nucleus from the ultraviolet radiation. But when it's not being protected, it will definitely accelerate the aging process. And if you don't believe me, all right, go down to South Beach, Miami, and walk around and look at some of the people that are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that have lived there all their lives. Okay, you can definitely tell. All right. So unfortunately, because of ultraviolet radiation, you increase your likelihood of skin cancer depending on how much exposure you receive. You need to understand something about skin cancer. It is the most predominant, prevalent type of cancer. Okay? It's 5 times more prevalent than breast cancer in women. It's 5 times more prevalent than prostate cancer in men. Okay? It is the most common type of cancer, and you need to be careful. All right? A lot of times we see skin cancer on the head and neck because those are the areas that get the most exposure to the UV radiation from the sun. All right? So folks like myself have to be very careful. All right. That concludes chapter 6. I am going to be posting this immediately, and then I'm going to be working on, I got a couple recordings from some of my other classes for chapter 7. So I'd like to get all that out there for you folks so you can watch it, because I know you got a lecture test coming up next week. Okay? So I hope this does help you out, these review classes. The other ones that I'll be posting are recordings from some of my other classes. They go into a little bit more detail. So some of you might like that, okay? Because if you're one of those students that really appreciates the detail, it'll get into a lot more detail. I won't say a lot, because I get into a lot of details with these reviews. The reviews are just the material that I feel like are very important, or some of the concepts that students have a difficult time with. All right. Well, I hope that helps you out. I will get this posted as soon as possible, and I look forward to seeing everybody at the